Share via email. Report story. Chapter 3. The first thing that Ochako Uraraka noticed was that it was extremely hot. It was this severe heat that had roused her from her deep sleep, abruptly waking her as the heat rolled over her like ocean waves. She used one arm to push herself up into a half-sitting position when a sharp jolt of pain shot through her side and down her legs. She couldn't hold back the scream that escaped from her mouth as the pain rocketed through her, and only managed to stifle the sound by biting her fist. She didn't know where she was, everything was pitch black, suffocating her senses as if she had been packed into a hole filled with sand. She shook her head, trying to clear it, and reached a tentative hand around her in a small circle, trying to avoid stretching her wounds as she searched for some sort of weapon or tool to use. When she found nothing in her immediate circle, she stretched forward just slightly, searching for anything, even a small pocket knife to have at her disposal. She sucked in a breath at the pain but forced herself to lean farther forward. Suddenly, her hand touched something cold and smooth, a refreshing feeling against the stifling heat. Forgetting her pain momentarily, Ochako launched forward and curled her fingers around the object. The pain reminded her of its presence as it returned in full force, nearly knocking her back with its ferocity. Ochako bit her fist so hard that she bled, her teeth puncturing four tiny slits in the side of her hand. Tears streamed uncontrollably from her eyes, but she did not care to wipe them away as she took deep breaths in an attempt to calm herself. Her heart was beating so fast it didn't feel like it was beating at all, fluttering wildly in her chest like a hummingbird trying to escape a cage. As her breathing and heartbeat finally slowed to a more normal pace, she lifted the object that was still clutched in her hand and brought it up to her face. One quick sniff told her it was metal, and she inwardly cheered, hoping it was some sort of weapon. She ran her fingers over the object, keeping her pinky in the air to avoid floating it away on accident. Her finger pads dragged over the smooth object, feeling out its shape. It felt curved, and although it was smooth on one side, she discovered that it was inverted on the other side like a sharp, long trowel. As her fingers explored the object more, she found that it had extremely sharp tips and a huge dent that fanned out on both edges of the narrow object, creating sharp, broken pieces of metal that fanned out from the original object. She could not determine what it was but figured that she could try to use it as a weapon should things come to that. She looked around, trying to discern anything from the thick darkness, a small light or a hole somewhere that would allow her to find help or an exit. That was when she remembered her phone. Her eyes went wide and she brought her hand quickly from the metal object to her pocket, digging around for the familiar item that she always kept with her. You won't find what you were looking for in there. A voice echoed softly from directly in front of her. Ochako yelped and scrambled away from where she had been laying, ignoring the white-hot pain that stabbed at her side and legs. Her heart was in her throat, leaping to escape, and her breathing had turned so ragged that she was struggling to get air into her lungs without a burning feeling setting her throat on fire. She instinctively dropped the metal object, covering her side wound with one hand and holding out the other hand defensively, as if that would help her against an attack. Suddenly, bright lights flickered on, washing the whole room in a blinding white light so that Ochako had to cover her eyes with the hand she had been
Uy,
holding out in front of her. Ochako had to cover her eyes with the hand she had been holding out in front of her. She forced herself to open her eyes, blinking back the tears that the light brought to her eyes and peered through her fingers, looking for the owner of the voice that sent chills racking through her body despite the heat. As soon as her eyes were adjusted enough for her to see, she saw a man slumped over in a comfy armchair, his arms draped lazily over the armrests and his face covered with a goggled mask. She also noticed what she had been holding and managed to scoot farther away from him despite the pain. She had been holding one of his metal claws. The metal claw rose from where she had dropped it on the ground like a snake who had just awoken from its deep slumber, snapping its pointed tips menacingly. Ochako put a hand to her mouth, trying to control her shaking as she drew her eyes away from the claw and settled them on the man in the center of the room. Promoted stories. You'll also like. After all. Fluke 11.4K 802. Will edit once I'm free. N. This is a work of fiction, and any similarity with other works is purely coincidental. Excuse grammatical errors and misspellings, Eng. The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 57.2K 1.8 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. I am, sequel of, UR check mark 69.4K 1.8K. This book is the sequel of, You Are So Better Read that first before going here. Tears of Joy. Thank you to that one reader that suggested this title. I can't see you sad face but thank you. Feelings. Izawa. X-Reader 57.2K 1.3K RE posting. This until I edit it, sorry if it's not good, it's my first time writing a story. You enroll at UA and you have multiple quirks you are really good at using, why? Hurt cuz I love you to death Izuocha. Ha. 8.7K 141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as the heroes return. MHAXJJK ongoing 114K 1.7K and Quad Izuku. Midoriya, after being betrayed and killed, vanishes leaving hurt people behind. After 2 months and a hack, he come back. changed. How will the class finished? 28.4K 508 tilde he save all of them just a smile plastered on his face before disappearing through the wind. The man lifted one arm lazily to his face and pulled off the mask in a simple, fluid motion. The green lens of the goggles glinted in the white light as he pulled the night vision mask from his face. He took a second to blink away the effects of the bright light and wiped away the sweat at his brow before turning his gaze to Ochako, who was half sitting up, half laying down in a puddle of her own blood. He raised two fingers to his brow and rubbed his eyes with a frown on his face. Tisk tisk, this is such a mess, he said. At first, Ochako thought he was talking about his crime and the amount of damage he had caused to the town, but then he gestured to her broken body with one of his metal claws. There is blood all over my floor. I meant to recharge before you woke up and clean it up, but that didn't quite go according to plan, he said with a growl. Ochako swallowed her anger and kept her mouth shut. If she was to survive to see another day, she needed to be smart. He had given her some information. He needed to recharge, and it had taken longer than expected. It wasn't much, but she raked through her mind in search of a way to use that information against him. The man then stood up abruptly, the chair shooting out from behind him and his claws raising to their full height beside him. Ochako counted 8 claws in total, snapping their tips like the jaws of angry alligators. That was when the memories all came back. Walking with Deku through town, getting groceries for Sato, being cornered in the alleyway by an 8-armed villain, seeing Deku launch to the nearest store to get help, the bullet soaring through the air, almost in slow motion as she bolted after it, leaping in front of it at the last second. The rest was all dark, so she assumed she had been knocked out after that point. She had been shot. The realization hit her nearly as hard as the pain had, shock electrifying her bones and setting her side on fire. She gasped and removed the arm that was covering it so that she could see the damage in the bright light. All of the color drained from her face as she saw the blood seeping from the hole in her side like a thick red ink spilling onto a blank page. She tried to shift her position, to get an even better look at the wound when pain shot through both her side and her legs. She glanced at her legs and the sight almost caused her to faint. Her legs were twisted at odd angles. They were broken. What happened to my legs? Ochako managed to choke out after a moment of silence. I broke them. The man said simply. I can't have you escaping now, can I? What do you want? Ochako asked, her voice gaining a slight edge of confidence as she let her anger seep into her muscles. Oh, but if I told you that, it would not be a surprise, would it? The man replied with a cold chuckle that drained what little courage Ochako had gained. Even so, she set her face in the most determined look she could muster. If she wanted to see her friends, Deku and Iida and the rest of Class 1A, and become a hero, she needed to stay focused and not give up no matter how difficult the situation got. The villain saw the look she put on her face and broke into another small fit of cold chuckles. Going to fight me now, are you? With two broken legs and a shot to the side. He laughed aloud this time, his laughter echoing around the stiflingly hot room, bouncing off of the metal walls and dousing Ochako in its cold shadow. Ochako failed to suppress a shudder as the chill of his laughter settled on her shoulders. Noticing this, the villain stretched his legs into a lunging stance, his head and back as low to the ground as he could muster while keeping a straight back and remaining standing. He looked like a lion about to pounce on a broken zebra. Well then, he said with an evil smirk. Good luck. Even before he had finished his sentence he had launched at Ochako, both his normal and metal hands outstretched for her. Biting down on her fist to keep from screaming, Ochako twisted her body and used her arms to throw herself just out of his arm's reach. She was lucky that all of his arms had been facing forward rather than some of them blocking the sides of the room, which had enabled her to make a hasty escape from his grasp. But at a cost. Tears streamed down her face and she could barely see in the haze of pain that blanketed her vision, her mind exploding with yellow and red spots. She swayed, her arms barely able to keep her body off of the floor which had now somehow increased in temperature. The heat burned the exposed parts of her body such as her hands and face but the pain was so insignificant compared to the other injuries that she barely felt it. Ochako managed to raise her head enough to look back at the villain, who was standing and shaking the dust from his hair that had cascaded upon him when he had hit the wall from the momentum of his jump. He turned now to Ochako, a wicked grin on his lips as he saw her body barely able to function. So, you are willing to break yourself to win, is that right? The villain asked. The sentence sparked a memory in the remnants of her viable thoughts. Her mind brought up a watery image of a green-haired boy with bright green eyes and a wide smile that lit up the day. Deku. Ochako felt herself get slightly stronger. I have to be like Deku, she thought as she forced her mind to exit the cloud of pain and focus on the task at hand. She shook her head with a quick jerk and forced herself to turn to face the villain. He smiled at her maliciously with a smile that met his eyes. He was genuinely happy to be causing such pain to her right now. Her anger bubbled up over her pain, but she kept her face in a look of despair, waiting for him to attack again. It didn't take long for him to launch at her again, this time fixing his last mistake by stretching two of his claws on either side to catch her if she tried to dodge to the left again. Luckily for her, this was what she had been counting on. She forced her legs under her and shot from the ground similarly to Sue with both her arms and her legs, and reached her hands out like a cat. Splaying her fingers, she managed to grab a hold of one of his metallic claws. Again, she inwardly cheered as she pressed her finger pads against the startlingly cold metal, a light pink light emitting from them as she activated her quirk. Like she had anticipated, the claw lifted above her head, rendering it useless. If she had been stronger, she would have bolted under the arm to touch the villain's exposed side to render him useless as well, but that maneuver had cost her even more than the last one. As she rolled underneath the useless arm and away from the villain, she could not even prop herself up on her arms. Her bare skin on her arms and face burned on the hot floor as she lay there, unable to do anything to stop the pain from pumping through her like electrical jolts or the blood from leaking from her body. Although the villain had once again fallen for her stunts, he had braced himself more and had launched with less fury, resulting in him avoiding hitting the wall. He was able to whip around almost immediately and pounce on Ochako. Four metal claws lifted her from the ground, the other ones minus the useless one pointed at her like sentient knives. She gulped but could not do anything more to stop the villain. The villain began to laugh his horrid laugh once more when he stopped dead. The claws that were not occupied whipped around and pointed at the ceiling. They opened up like blooming flowers and a bright light flashed from their centers. After the bright light had faded, the claws closed and opened again, this time facing the wall. The lights now turned on for longer, projecting what they had caught on their cameras onto the wall. Ochako's whole body went stiff as she recognized the dark green hair of the first figure and the hero costumes of the other three. She tried to hide her surprise but couldn't. The shock was written on her face as if with a pencil. The villain caught this and looked directly at her, his lips breaking into the foulest smile he had yet given her. Ah, more playthings for my lovely claws. The villain said. Quick as a flash, the metal claws that were not holding her reached around and grabbed a hold of her legs, pulling and twisting them. Ochako let out one horrible scream before the black haze of pain overtook her senses completely and she fell away from consciousness. Chapter 4. The night was dark and cold despite the fact that sunrise would arrive soon. The chill settled into the students' skin even with their costumes on and caused them to shiver. Nobody spoke as every student slunk over the silent meadow like cats going on a hunt, their shoes muffled by the thick mud that was clumped around the grass stalks. The moon shone high in the sky like a large beacon, its light reflecting on Izawa's metal scarf, the capture weapon glinting like a knife in the darkness. Their eyes were sharp even in the dark, and their ears were strained for any noise that would break the natural orchestra of sound emanating from the night around them. Izuku stood right at the front, Aizawa's back directly in front of him as they were led through the field, Izuku having demanded to be the one to find Ochako since he deemed himself responsible for her loss. More bitter memories flooded his brain and he twitched his head ever so slightly as a way to attempt to clear his head of the horrible events that had taken place that very night. The images began to fade, but Ochako's scream as she was sent tumbling to the ground by a bullet rang in his ears loud and clear, no matter how hard he tried to shake it off. Aizawa paused ahead of Izuku, raising his head and looking around, resembling something like a black panther as he searched the surrounding territory for any sign of danger or a clue to their destination. After a moment though, Aizawa pressed on, holding his capture weapon in both hands to avoid having it rustle on the surrounding brush. Izuku remembered how Aizawa had been so attentive when they had gone to investigate the crime scene, his face scrunching as he scrutinized every single piece of evidence until he had a grip on something, following every trail until it faded and disappeared. It had been Aizawa who had gotten the group this far, tracking the villain through his destructive, almost drunken manner of travel through town and to the edge of this field. They had been following the villain for a couple of hours, their bones creaking and their feet protesting with every step, but nobody complained as they trekked further and further away from UA. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed across the field, causing Aizawa to freeze, his body standing stock still in the grass. The other students copied him without even realizing it, their breaths suspended as every head whipped around directly to their right. Aizawa held up an unnecessary hand even for Bakugo did not even dare think of tearing off on his own, as a signal for them to wait, his eyes narrowing in that direction. A pause. Soon another, louder bang echoed across the field, this time followed by a small scream. Aizawa, Izuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, Tsuyu, Yaoyorozu, Tokiyami, Kirishima, Iida and Shoji all moved at the same time, their steps still silent, but rushed as they bolted across the marshy grass towards the sound of their friend in pain. The sounds faded and the group stood still once more, listening intensely for any more hints to Ochako's location. Izuku forced himself to plant his feet as he felt the familiar itching feeling to start pacing with worry. He could barely contain himself. He wanted to rush in there and protect Ochako with his life, to make sure she was okay and to promise her that he would never leave her side again, no matter the danger. Again, he forced himself to remain still in the now dead silent meadow. The normal nighttime chatter had died down completely at the sound of the scream. They waited for what felt like hours, the chill of the night sinking even more so that their breaths came out in clouded puffs and their skin felt icy to the touch. Aizawa dipped his head and used his hand to part the grass, nobody moving as he seemed to discover something, his eyes thinning into slits and his hands gripping his capture weapon even tighter than usual. Aizawa moved forward slightly, his feet making no sound as he stepped through the grass. Then they all heard the slight whirring sound. If any nighttime noises had still been floating through the night, they would have missed it. As soon as the whirring sound stopped, a terrible scream pierced the night like a sharp sword, stabbing through their hearts in a way that sent an icy chill down the spines of the group. Ochako. Without even thinking, Izuku rushed forward. He barely registered Aizawa calling his name or his classmates pounding behind him, his head filled with rage and worry and his vision obscured with red. The screaming continued for what felt like an unbearable amount of time, cutting into Izuku's heart deeper and deeper with each renewed voice of pain. Finally, Izuku skidded to a stop where a steel door stood ajar in the ground like a metallic hole. He did not even hesitate to jump in, the screams surrounding him on all sides as he slid down what he imagined was a tunnel, darkness covering his eyes and suffocating his other senses. The cold was nearly unbearable in the tunnel, the darkness and the depth of the tunnel contributing to a chill that Izuku had never felt in his life. It was so cold that his teeth burned when he opened his mouth to suck in a breath. But then he hit the bottom of the tunnel. The transition from severe cold to extreme heat was almost enough to make him pass out, his head swimming as the temperature change rocked his body. Wherever he had landed was just as dark as the tunnel, his senses completely obscured by the darkness that swallowed him. He ventured one small step forward, his hands reaching out cautiously as he searched for any kind of wall, table or tool to grab a hold of. All of his senses were on high alert, so when a loud gasp and a soft, "damn it," sounded behind him, Izuku jumped out of his skin. He felt someone's hand wave around him before hitting him in the face. He let out a small noise and shook his head. "Deku. Is that you, you damn nerd?" Bakugo whispered from directly to his left. "Yes, it's me. It's fucking hot in here," Bakugo said, his voice so low it was almost a rumble. Yes, but that doesn't mean you should gripe about it, Bakugo, a soft voice said from Izuku's right. Both students had to clamp on their tongues with their teeth to avoid calling out as Aizawa shuffled around beside them, his hands digging through the pockets of his costume for something. Suddenly, a small click echoed in the room and the bright light of a flashlight chased away the surrounding darkness. All of the students had made it down the hole, although Suyu was shaking the sleep from her eyes caused by the cold-induced hibernation state from her frog quirk, and Yaoyorozu was trying to wake Kirishima, who had fainted from the intense heat. What now? Iida asked, his arm resting on a nearby wall for support, his face pale and his glasses askew on his face, his eyes dull as if he had a fever. Aizawa didn't answer but instead held up the flashlight with one hand and held up his metallic scarf with the other, scanning the room. The room was almost completely empty, save for a few metal cabinets that were lying dented and broken on the floor and some rubble that surrounded them. Aizawa stretched out a hand behind him. Everyone please file behind me, I don't want anyone getting hurt on this mission, he said. The students knew that this was unlikely given their situation but followed Aizawa's orders silently and without hesitation. Izuku once again stood at the front, his bright green eyes flashing with the reflected light as they wildly shot to every corner of the room in search of his friend. Then Aizawa's light moved to the very far back right corner of the room, a corner blocked by metal cabinets and showered with rubble. A limp figure was suddenly bathed in that light, her back facing them so that the light would not reflect on her eyes. It was Ochako. Ochako. Izuku cried out, using her first name without even thinking and rushing forward to meet her. Midoriya, no. Aizawa called behind him but followed Izuku at a slower pace anyway. Izuku skidded to a stop at Ochako's side, dropping to his knees and using a gentle hand to flip her over. Her eyes were closed and her face had a few bruises but it was otherwise unharmed. Again, without thinking, Izuku lowered his head to her chest and placed his ear there, listening for a heartbeat. Tears welled up in his eyes and when he closed them they ran down his cheeks, creating two lines that cut through the dust on his face. She was alive. He turned to tell Aizawa and his friends when one of the cabinets in front of him shifted slightly. Everyone froze except for Izuku, who pulled the unconscious Ochako close to him, his arms holding her protectively so that the pain of her wounds would not wake her. He realized that she felt surprisingly light and small in his arms, his muscled biceps gently but firmly holding her to him so that one arm was curled beneath her legs and the other supported her upper back and shoulders, causing her head to rest in the crook of his neck. The cabinet moved again, this time creaking and cracking. Midoriya, get out of there, Aizawa said, his voice cracking with worry and urgency. Izuku made to stand up when the cabinet seemed to explode, the otherwise small piece of metal expanding and reshaping until the villain with the 8 arms stood before him with a devilish smile plastered on his face. I would like it if you would please not steal my trophy from me, he said, his voice sending chilled needles cascading down Izuku's spine before he launched at the pair of them, his arms outstretched. Outstretched. Where stories live. Live. Discover now.